Welcome, and today we're going to be looking at the ancient city of Norumbega. But first, I wanted to share something that was shared with me by Paul Trausner, and thank you, Paul. It was a view of the old Washington Monument, and many of you may have seen my last video where I featured this photo that was an apparent proposed look for the Washington Memorial, and we see it looking very Greco-Roman in this photo. And I had posed the question of whether or not these proposed renderings may have been actual depictions of the time. And this morning I received a tip on this Washington Memorial in 1871. And here is a look. Now this was a postcard of Washington, D.C., again in 1871. And here we go. And here we see the Washington Memorial in the background and looking exactly as it did in the proposed rendering. And I'm sure we could find a better image of this now that we know it exists. But really remarkable. And how far along is this city? Because we already see signs of partial burial of many of these buildings, including this very Capitol building, as we can see here. And clearly the building being much lower, and as I've mentioned before, all of these buildings seeming very top-heavy, and really this picture gives us a good idea of what it may have looked like with this whole extra level that may have been ground level. And we can see older photos where these stairs have actually been added, just like in the Salt Lake City Temple, stairs added and complete hollowness underneath. And so how old is this building? And how deep does it really go? And what we can see here is the old windows being buried, eventually filled back in. And we can absolutely see the old window. And I was looking for a better photo of this that I've seen in the past, but really amazing. Now on to this Norumbega. Now I've never heard of this, and I'm very excited. Some call this a legendary Norse city in western Massachusetts. Norumbega is a legendary settlement in northeastern North America, which appeared on many early maps from the 1500s until American colonization. The houses were said to have pillars of gold, and the inhabitants carried quarts of pearls on their heads. The town of Bangor, Maine, embraced the legend in the 19th century, naming their municipal hall Norumbega Hall. In 1886, inventor Joseph Barker Stearns built a mansion named Norumbega Castle, which still stands on U.S. Route 1 in Camden, Maine. In the late 19th century, Eben Horsford linked the name and legend of Norumbega to supposed Norse settlements on the Charles River, and built the Norumbega Tower at the confluence of Stony Brook in western Massachusetts. The word Norumbega was originally spelled Orenbega. In a 1529 map of America, the spelling Orenbega was originally seen in a 1529 map of America, and the word is believed to derive from one of the Algonquian languages spoken in New England. It may mean quiet place between the rapids, or quiet stretch of water. Today the myth is merely reflected in such places named as Norumbega Mountains, formerly the Brown Mountains, in Acadia National Park. So let's have a little look at this Norumbega Castle region. And here it is. This is the region. And perhaps this whole area And at a quick glance we can see signs of older civilization. And since my computer crashed, I haven't loaded my Google Earth yet, but we really don't need to. We can see all kinds of intersecting roads cutting through forests and lots of unnatural seeming things. And this would be fun to do some more exploring. But the myth told us that they sailed through this great river, and here it was believed was the city, and a lot of underlying remnants, it seems. And here we can just get an idea of many of the maps depicting this ancient city. And what they're telling us is a fabled city. And what do you think? Depicting a monstrous castle. And is this all made up? Were these people simply amusing themselves? And here's a look at some remnants of this city. In this particular picture, they're attributing it to lost Viking settlements. Not sure if the Vikings were known for building towers like this. And regardless, this is clearly just a little portion of this building, or what's left of it. And even here, the Norumbega Park, a famous pleasure resort in Boston, and perhaps a repurposed resort, just like the repurposing of the World's Fairs and everything else. And here a little look at this Norumbega Castle in Camden, and definitely looking a little top-heavy itself. And in this next section, I wanted to talk about Native Americans. And many of us have been looking at a lot of videos, and the question always comes up, what about the Native Americans? What do they have to say about this? If there were apparently civilizations already existing. And I live on a reservation, the Ute Reservation here in Utah, and for a while I've had the opportunity to ask many native stories and actually gotten very little responses to my inquiries. Many of the elders are no longer with us, and this was shared with me in a comment by Arian with a link leading me back to stolenhistory.org. And this thread starts out, did Cherokee Indians build the Greco-Roman architecture in the U.S.? Now, oftentimes we speak of the Tartarians, but how about some people that we actually know for a fact existed, even though the historical evidence leaves no doubt in my mind of the existence of a Tartaria. But nevertheless, the Cherokee Indians were living in Western-style houses. The Cherokee were living inside antebellum mansions before settlers turned them into plantations. Now, if you remember the recent video I did on the Windsor ruins in Mississippi, isn't that exactly what we saw in that story? Beautiful Greco-Roman architecture found in the middle of a cotton plantation. And the story was absolutely ridiculous of a man who built this after accumulating a small fortune only to die in his early 30s. Just shortly before or after his death was the property finished. And it just seemed completely ridiculous. And here we are with a little insight on the Cherokee living in antebellum mansions before they turned into plantations. And obviously we know that The people were forced off of their lands. The mansions look like Roman estates and are covered in pagan symbols and have murals inside. In the 1830s, Cherokees were said to have been expelled from their property. And here the comment that all roads lead to Rome, Georgia. It's called Rome because the Cherokee called their land Rome and claimed that they were Romans. And here a plaque from the Georgia Historical Society. At this house's core is the log home of a leader of the Cherokee Nation. His 223-acre plantation supported numerous outbuildings, orchards, and slaves, while the family served as ferry boat operators and merchants. And it is here where the Treaty of New Echota in 1835 was drafted, which promised the Cherokee land and compensation for voluntary moving to Oklahoma. Their forced removal became known as the Trail of Tears. The chief knew death was imminent for selling tribal lands, but believed the treaty would save his people. He, his son, and nephew were murdered in 1839. And here a look at their home, of the chief's home. Not at all what we would attribute to a Native American home or a Cherokee. Here his original home, and really a modest home, what we would expect the people of this time to be building, not the Native Americans though. And they say it had a basement. Here's a little look at the basement. Some brick, some very large seeming block work, and even some cinder block, not sure. And here, most interestingly, is a picture of this chief, painted by Charles Bird King in 1834. Ridge was part of the Cherokee and a group of young chiefs in the early 19th century. And they speak of the Cherokee as being a group that was all mixed races, but identified as Cherokee. And interestingly, this article goes on to talk about how the major was involved in a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit, against being removed from the land. So he didn't go out without a fight. The Cherokee were filing federal lawsuits in 1820s and 30s in an effort to keep their land. And here the commenter is humoring that he learned in school, gunsmoke, and dances with wolves that the Native Americans did not speak English and lived in teepees so they could follow buffalo around. Not once did I hear or see them wearing colonial garb and filing federal lawsuits to keep their plantations and slaves. And here a little look at a monument in Rome, Georgia. And here at the City Hall, and found in other parts of the world. And many have been offended by this statue, as it really bears no familiarity to our local stories. And here a little look. In 1886, a major flood flooding the streets of Georgia. And really, we're not supposed to have power at this time. 1886 is a little early, and just an absolutely amazing city here. Not sure how much of this remains. And again, we see the two worlds side by side. Beautiful architecture, cheap signage, repurposed. And once again, oh, so this was in front of the Masonic Temple building, of course. And again here. And showing iron columns underneath the original level of downtown. Here is a library, the Bizel Memorial Library. And they attribute this style to this day to the Early Cherokee Gothic. Very interesting. Cherokee Gothic. Interesting little story about a fire and a rebuilding. And the Cherokee Gothic, they're saying, is a brick and light stone. And here another little Cherokee plantation in Fort Payne, Alabama. Another story of a Cherokee by the name of Ross that was forced to leave because of this Treaty of New Echota. Here another little Cherokee house that burned down, owned by Indian Chief Greenwood LaFleur. And there's also the Chief Van House, which is still standing. And a little look from the newspaper in 1942 in Mississippi. Here it is, a better look at it. The Chief Van House, built of locally made brick in 1804. This house, the finest in the Cherokee Nation, was the home of a town chief, James Van, son of a Scotch trader, a Cherokee chieftain's daughter. They had several business ventures around the home. The land was tilled by his slaves. Very interesting. Here a little look at fair-skinned Native Americans, and really reminding me of the Ainu of Japan, also a fair-skinned Japanese culture who does not seem to bear any resemblance to modern Japanese. And here a little look at some Native American tribes and what their people may have looked like. So here we have a Cherokee, here a Choctaw, not at all what we would expect. But as we have dug into the unknown history, it's not very shocking to us. Now that we've seen colonial-style buildings in China and in all parts of the world, and places where we would not expect them, it's not so shocking to actually have a look at what the people may have looked like. Of course, if they were building buildings like this, they would be dressed in a equally different style than expected. And this is all 5 civilized tribes living in the southeastern United States before the government forced their relocation under Indian Removal Act to other parts of the country, especially the future state of Oklahoma. The act, signed into law by President Jackson in May of 1830, required that all Native American tribes living east of the Mississippi River relocate to lands west of the river. And this was a fascinating comment. And the commenter says that their great-grandparents said that the government was lying to us about how old everything is. They were Native American Indian. I have records dating back to 1500s from my ancestors. Book of Congress has records on Native American Indian tribes from 1300s living in the old cities. Some of the tribes built them, and the Spanish. Spain, Mexico had a war with the Texas Republic when white government started removal of Native American Indian tribes to Arkansas and Oklahoma. I am mixed with Irish, Klamath, Choctaw blood. I have an old Bible that dates back to 1388. It's written in Cherokee and some English. Shows one ancestor from Dublin, Ireland, married to a Choctaw, Lewis Miller. The Native American people did use the woman's maiden name. Anyway, my membership tribe's Klamath from Oregon has records from over 5,000 years ago. We have kept them secret. I also have 6 years of American history in my college, the Ancestry Genealogy. Our school history books lie firsthand from a Native American family. And today, I asked a Native American friend if she had ever heard of anything like this, of the Cherokee perhaps being different than other tribes. And she giggled and said that did make sense, because amongst each other, they said that the Cherokees were like the white Native Americans and were more advanced and cultured, and very interesting that it was implied in a somewhat derogatory fashion, as if they were not the same people, and proving to me that this knowledge has existed, even in the newer generations. Speaking of the Cherokee as a people that more so followed the modern ways of living, and everything being contrary to what we've been taught in our schools and shown in our movies. And lastly, I wanted to apologize about my last video. This clock was not in Salisbury, but it was actually in Prague. And if you recall in the video, it was a search engine that led me to this clock, showing me that this was actually in Salisbury when it was not. And I still have not received a confirmed picture of the Salisbury clock, but it was said that it was very similar to the clock in Wells, England. And here we can get a little look. Really, really fascinating. And what are these clocks depicting? Is this a reset cycle? And really, this center portion really reminding me of what we see with the Roswell stone. And the Roswell stone depicting something very similar. Some sort of clock depicting the cycles or something. And here we can even see this same symbol has shown up in fields as a crop circle. Very interesting. And that's it for today. I do thank you for joining me, and do have a blessed day. Please like, comment, and subscribe.